Distinguished guests, I'll skip the protocol at this stage because you'll be officially welcomed in a few moments. I just want to say that I will be your grand this morning's proceedings, and it's indeed a privilege for me to share this historic occasion with you. I'm Dasrat Chetty, Vice Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and my link with Albert Luthuli and Luthuli lecture goes back to 2 years ago. The Albert Luthuli lecture at the University of the Department of Family. So I have fond memories of those events. Some of you may even have attended and will remember that in the first 3 years when we held that lecture, we had people of the caliber of President Thabo Mbeki, President Chisano, President Kenneth Kaunda, who addressed us in the name of Chief Albert Luthuli. And we felt that it was befitting for a man of that kind of stature to have people of equal stature to pay tribute to the progressive work done by Albert Luthuli. So it's actually an absolute pleasure for me to be back here. I was here when we inaugurated this settlement, and I'm really glad to see the extent to which it has been developed over the years. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't been back too many times. But development is absolutely the facility, what you have done with the place. And I think in continuing to preserve and uphold and propagate values that Chief Albert you've been doing a wonderful job. So thank you to all of you for being here today. I think we can look forward to an incredibly interesting Larry Shaw, who will introduce later. But all that remains for me to do is to say that the lecture is bound to be a very relevant one, given the times and the conditions that we face, what is happening internationally. And we'll be able to reflect, I think, on the contribution that Chief Albert Luthuli made in terms of international relations and what the significance is for us today. So in saying that, I would like to call upon and invite Ms. Sinenhlanhla Mthembu to welcome you here today and officially opening the proceedings on behalf of the Luthuli Museum Board and its chairperson, Ms. Mthembu.
Thank you, Prof. for the opportunity. Today marks exactly 20 years since the opening of Luthuli Museum. It was opened to the public on the 21st of August 2004 by the former President Thabo Mbeki. So today we celebrate that opening of Luthuli Museum, and we acknowledge your presence today. We are happy that you are here to commemorate and celebrate this occasion with us. We are very happy that you are here. I am acknowledging each and every person who's here. May I acknowledge Professor Larry Shaw, who is our speaker for today, Dr. Nolutando Hade, our discussant, Ms. Jacqueline Cole from the U.S. Consulate, Durban, Professor Puleng, Luthuli Research Chair, Professor Darathi, our Program Director, Ms. Velili, who's representing the Luthuli family, Mr. Sandile Luthuli from Luthuli family, and a museum board member, KwaZulu Natal SRC, and students, University of Zululand students, school principals, learners. We acknowledge the presence of the Ward Councillor, the Councillor of Ward 10, Mr. Thulelishe Dube. We acknowledge Luthuli Museum Management. We also acknowledge the presence of the local leadership, the youth structures, community and political organizations who are here. We are very happy that you are here. The purpose of Luthuli Museum is to commemorate and celebrate the life of Inkosi Albert Luthuli. So it is a great pleasure that this moment does open our eyes, and it does teach us. And since he's a big book, we keep on turning the pages. And today we are looking forward to reading yet another chapter of his life. And we appreciate the speakers and everybody who agreed to participate and give us their own experience, share their own experience of how they know Ngozi. With those few words, you are all welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Ntengo, for the words of official welcome on this historic occasion. I think the fact that we have representatives here from the U.S. Consulate, from universities, from a whole range of organizations, learners, tells us something about the importance of partnerships and relationships. And an organization like this one grows and develops and achieves its objectives if those partnerships are strengthened over a period of time, if relationships are strengthened. And I can see that the board of the Museum Council is doing its utmost to ensure that it's rooted in community and enjoys those good relationships with government and non-governmental organizations. In saying that, I would like to invite Ms. Jacqueline Cole, who is the Public Diplomacy Officer from the U.S. Consulate in Durban. Ms. Cole is a career diplomat, has been in the diplomatic corps for 17 years and has spent 3 years in Durban, and so has a good idea of the conditions and the challenges that we face as a community. Ms. Jacqueline Cole.
Thank you so much, Mr. Program Director. Hello, I'm Sani Bonani. To the Luthuli family representatives, museum staff, esteemed guests and speakers, friends and colleagues,
I greet you on behalf of the U.S. Mission to South Africa and our ambassador, Robert Reuben Briggity, on this glorious day. 58 years ago, Senator Robert Kennedy traveled to South Africa and sat with Chief Albert Luthuli outside under the tree in the garden. The meeting created a current that continues today in the strong relationship shared between our two countries. That meeting also reminds us the support of the principled Americans for the anti. There were always Americans of all colors and backgrounds who recognized the evil of apartheid and spoke out against it. And while we have seen great change in both our countries since that meeting in 1966, both countries continue the work of providing equality and dignity to all their citizens and to make good on the promise of their great constitutions. Myself personally, I studied African American studies, Black politics and movements. I also have master's degrees in African studies. And it wasn't until I came to this great region of South Africa that I really got to understand Albert Luthuli's impact, not only on South Africa, but on the globe and on the civil rights movement in the United States. That being said, myself, I work for an organization in the United States called Trans-Africa Forum as a college student. Ron Robinson was the founder, another American who we dedicated to the anti-apartheid movement. I look forward to moments like this, where we share one another's history and a better understanding of the ongoing support that we've given to each other and each other's struggles and our work to advance our future and the future for our children. The great legacy of Kennedy and Luthuli's dedication to the uplift of humanity lives on, not just in monuments or in museums, but in the hearts of young and old alike today. The day before they met here, Robert Kennedy made a speech at the then University of Natal in which he said, "I do not know any country in which there is more friendship towards South Africa, towards South Africa than there is in the United States." Let me close by reading a quote from the speech Kennedy gave in Cape Town on June 6th of 1966, arguably the greatest speech he ever gave, in which his family decided to engrave on his tombstone. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy, and daring those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. May the legacies of Robert Kennedy and Albert Luthuli encourage you and encourage us all to make this world a better place. Yobanda.
Thank you, Ms. Gold. Friends, we're now at the point where it's the main event, and I would like to invite Professor Larry Shaw to address us. But briefly, Professor Shaw is a professor and documentary filmmaker in the Department of Film and Media Studies at Hunter College in New York City. Professor Shaw grew up in Johannesburg and emigrated to the United States in the 1970s. He attended the University of Witwatersrand, where he received a BA majoring in political science. While at Wits, he was involved in NUSAS and the Vilgerspreet Fellowship Center. So some of you will know that NUSAS was on the forefront of anti-apartheid organizing at the time when it was difficult to organize across color lines given the geographical and other forms of segregation we faced. But NUSAS was a progressive organization that Larry belonged to. He has an MA from the University of Pennsylvania and a PhD from Stanford University. He was an activist in the American anti-apartheid movement, and in 1990, when the changes began in South Africa, He co-founded the South African American Organization and was its president for 5 years. Larry also regularly teaches a course on South Africa, Southern Africa, and the United States. He has worked previously with the Luthuli Museum. His documentary film, RFK, In the Land of A Ripple of Hope, was screened twice in partnership with the museum. The film features a section on Robert Kennedy's historic meeting with Chief Luthuli in 1966. The film has been widely screened in South Africa and in the US. Professor Shaw made a short video of this historical meeting for use in the museum's exhibits. I now like you to welcome Professor Larry Shaw.
Good morning, everyone. Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm very appreciative of the invitation from the Luthuli Museum to be here today for this very special commemoration. And I wanted to talk today about Chief Luthuli and America and the anti-apartheid movement in America. I look forward to questions at the end about events then as well as recent current events. America has always had a very special relationship with South Africa. Americans saw South Africa through the lens of their own history. Americans, particularly Black Americans, always felt a connection with what was going on in the American South and South Africa. When Americans saw the pictures coming from Soweto and Gugulethu, it reminded them of Birmingham and Montgomery. The segregation signs of the Jim Crow South looked like apartheid signs in South Africa. Things like segregated park benches, water fountains, and entrances to public buildings all looked the same. As someone once said, apartheid was like Jim Crow on steroids. Going back to the 19th century, there had always been various contacts between Americans and South Africans. Several American singing groups, like the Jubilee Singers, traveled to South Africa to popular acclaim. Several American missionary societies came to South Africa. As you know very well, the Congregational Church, and the American Board Mission were very active in South Africa. This, of course, included the Congregational Church right here in Groupville that Chief Luthuli administered to. You probably know the song, Here Come the Alabama. The Alabama was a naval ship of the Confederacy during the American Civil War that took harbor in Cape Town to avoid the Union Navy ships prowling the South Atlantic. John Dube, the founder of the ANC, also a Congregationalist, visited the United States. He studied in 1888 at Oberlin College. He later met and was influenced by Booker T. Washington and his Tuskegee Institute. They promoted self-reliance, which Dube introduced in South Africa with the establishment of the Oshlanga High School. Chief Luthuli visited the United States in 1948. He was invited by the American Board and the North American Missionary Conference. He mostly spoke to youth groups. He wrote in his book, Let My People Go, that when he was in the north of America, he felt much freer, certainly in the circles with whom he was spending time. However, he wrote, he was very conscious of the color bar in the South. It was like apartheid in South Africa. He experienced the vestiges of slavery and the Civil War, the Ku Klux Klan, and Jim Crow in the South. In fact, when he was in Atlanta, he wanted to go to the movies, but his host said, "I'm sorry, I cannot take you to the movies because I will not support segregation. The movie is like everything else in the segregated, like South Africa." Chief Luthuli saw the similarities to apartheid in South Africa, but he also saw the differences. He saw the benefits of the Constitution. In the United States, you at least had, in theory, a constitution that supported democratic rights for everybody. In the famous words of the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Of course, it turned out that at the time of the adoption of the Constitution in 1776, these ringing words only applied to white men. But he saw the efforts to live up to the promise of America to create a more perfect union, to continue the struggle all the way through the 20th century and the civil rights movement, including today. South Africa had nothing like that, did not have a constitution that you could begin to appeal to and say you must live up to this constitution. Chief Luthuli wrote about his visit to the South. He said, when Black Americans who he met, they asked, "Can we come over there to assist you?" He said he would reply, "It would be heartening if you could, but for one thing, the South African government wouldn't let you. Certainly not with that motive. For another, you'd find yourselves foreigners in the continent of your origin. But we're glad of your interest. And in any case, to the extent that you fight segregation here, you help indirectly. The more democratic America becomes, the better for those whom she influences. We need the interest of your churches too. There's a tendency of your white missionaries among us to drift away. They sometimes get identified with the whites." Unfortunately, Chief Luthuli returned to South Africa with the Nationalist Party election victory over Jan Smuts and the United Party in 1948. Things were bad already, but were about to get much worse with the adoption of the full apartheid blueprint of Dr. Verwoerd. Things were pretty quiet in the United States about South Africa in the 1950s. Most Americans only knew about South Africa through reading Alan Paton's novel, Cry the Beloved Country. It was reading in many, many high schools in the United States. But Sharpeville in March 1960 reverberated across the world, including the United States. It put South Africa in the news. The Rivonia trial was also covered and followed very closely in the United States. There was much discussion, but I learned that, as you probably know, the apartheid government wanted to hang the Rivonia. There's evidence of the intervention of President John Kennedy and Prime Minister Harold Macmillan of England to warn the apartheid government against this. We can only shudder to think what would have happened in South Africa if the Rivonia trials had been hung. American leaders heard of Chief Luthuli's Nobel Peace Prize in 1960. So did the early leaders of the American anti-apartheid movement. His prize was also noted at the United Nations in New York and contributed to the growth of the United Nations Anti-Apartheid Committee that played an important role for many years in bringing attention and putting pressure on South Africa. The bonds and connections between the civil rights movement in America and the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa was underlined in the relationship between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Chief Luthuli. They had mail exchanges with each other, and it seems they had correspondence which was hand-carried. Dr. King always saw the civil rights movement in the United States in its broader context and stressed that the struggle for freedom forms one long front crossing oceans and peoples. Despite the difficult struggles he faced in the United States, he spoke out against racism and war beyond the national borders. He showed particular concern over the situation in South Africa. For him, there was not only the bond between Black Americans and Africa, but the additional spiritual connection of nonviolent civil disobedience in the form of Satyagraha, which was born in South Africa under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, moved to India to secure the independence of that country, and returned to South Africa in the Defiance Campaign of the 1950s, before it was taken up by Dr. King in the civil rights movement in the United States. Dr. King wrote an article, "Where do we go from here? Chaos or community?" To quote, "Among the moral imperatives of our time, we are challenged to work all over the world with unshakable determination to wipe out the last vestiges of racism. Racism is no mere American phenomenon. Its vicious grasp knows no geographical boundaries. In fact, racism and its perennial ally, economic exploitation, provide the key to understanding most of the international complications of this generation." He continued, "The classic example of organized and institutionalized racism is the Union of South Africa. Its national policy and practice are the incarnation of the doctrine of white supremacy in the midst of a population which is overwhelmingly Black. But the tragedy of South Africa is virtually made possible by the economic policies of the United States and Great Britain, two countries which profess to be the moral bastions of our Western world." Dr. King sought to build an international alliance of peoples of all nations against racism and to promote nonviolent action to quarantine the racist regime in Pretoria. Most important, Chief Luthuli and Dr. King co-signed a declaration put out by the American Committee on Africa in 1963, calling attention to what was going on in South Africa under National Party rule. It was the first time where we see the call to isolate and put pressure on South Africa through actions like sanctions and divestment. This is an important document. It is an important start in mobilizing world opinion to back those in South Africa who were struggling to achieve equality. Black South Africans took heart in learning that they were not alone, and many white supremacists in South Africa saw hence for the first time how isolated they were going to become in future years. This joint statement was signed by many prominent Americans and promoted in a public campaign for sanctions against South Africa. The document read in part, "As an alternative to a race war, there exists another alternative, and the only solution which represents sanity, a transition to a society based upon equality for all without regard to color. Any solution founded on justice is unattainable until the government of South Africa is forced by pressure, both internal and external, to come to terms with the demands of the non-white majority. The apartheid republic is a reality today only because the peoples and governments of the world have been unwilling to place her in quarantine. Don't trade or invest in South Africa. Translate public opinion into public action by explaining facts to all peoples, to groups to which you belong, and to countries of which you are citizens, until an effective international quarantine of apartheid is established." These goals were only finally achieved in 1986, culminating in the US Congress's override of President Reagan's veto of sanctions legislation against South Africa. Dr. King brought attention to the situation in South Africa and Chief Luthuli in several public forums. On his way to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, in Oslo in 1964, he stopped over in London where he gave a speech on South Africa. He said, "In our struggle for freedom and justice in the United States, which has also been so long and arduous, we feel a powerful sense of identification with those in the far more deadly struggle for freedom in South Africa. We know how Africans there and their friends of other races strove for half a century to win their freedom by non-violent methods. We have honored Chief Luthuli for his leadership, and we know how this non-violence was only met by increasing violence from the state, increasing repression, culminating in the shootings of Sharpeville and all that has happened since. Clearly, there is much in Mississippi and Alabama to remind South Africa of their own country. Yet even in Mississippi, we can organize to register Negro voters. We can in short organize the people in nonviolent action. But in South Africa, even in the mildest forms of nonviolent resistance, leads with years of imprisonment, and leaders over many years have been restricted and silenced and imprisoned. We can understand how in that situation, people felt so desperate that they turned to other methods, such as sabotage. Though we in the civil rights movement still have a long and difficult struggle in our own country, increasingly we are recognizing our power as voters. Already we have made our feelings clear to the president. Increasingly we intend to influence American policy towards South Africa in Congress and in the United Nations. In a speech in New York on Human Rights Day, December the 10th, 1965, Dr. King said, "Africa has been depicted for more than a century as the home of black cannibals and ignorant primitives. Despite volumes of facts controverting this picture, the stereotype persists in books, motion pictures, and other media communications. Africa does have spectacular savages and brutes today, but they are not black. They are the sophisticated white rulers of South Africa, who profess to be cultured, religious, and civilized, but whose conduct and philosophy stamps them unmistakably as modern-day barbarians. In this period, when the American Negro is giving moral leadership and inspiration to his own nation, he must find the resources to aid his suffering brothers in his ancestral homeland. Nor is this aid a one-way street. The civil rights movement in the United States has derived immense inspiration from the successful struggles of those Africans who have attained freedom in their own nations. The fact that black men govern states, are building democratic institutions, sit in world tribunals, and participate in global decision-making gives every Negro a needed sense of dignity. Civilization has come a long way. It has far still to go, and it cannot afford to be set back by resolute, wicked men. Negroes were dispersed over thousands of miles and over many continents, yet today they found each other again. Negroes and whites have been separated for centuries by evil men and evil myths, but they have found each other. The powerful unity of Negro with Negro and white with Negro is stronger than the most potent and entrenched racism. The whole human race will benefit when it ends the abomination that has diminished the stature of men for too long. This is the task to which we are called by the suffering in South Africa, and our response should be swift and unstinting. Out of this struggle will come the glorious reality of the family of man. Despite the similarities in the struggle against racism in South Africa and the United States that I've been speaking to, we should obviously also take note of the differences which resonate today. Perhaps we can talk about this later. In South Africa, black people were a majority and oppressed in the land of their ancestors. In America, black people are a minority who were brought there in a most brutal fashion by slave ships. In America, obviously, African Americans are a minority, whereas in South Africa, whites are the minority. Let me talk a little bit about Chief Luthuli's impact on Senator Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy learned a lot from his meeting with Chief Luthuli. As you know, he visited with Chief Luthuli right here, sat under the tree over there, on June 8, 1966. Their meeting influenced Robert Kennedy's thinking in his presidential campaign in 1968, which you know was tragically cut short when he was assassinated in California during the Democratic primaries. His meeting with Chief Luthuli expanded his understanding of US foreign policy, race relations, and Africa. Senator Edward Kennedy, his younger brother, speaking later, said, Luthuli was always in his mind. Robert Kennedy really understood how US policy towards South Africa was caught up in larger Cold War issues. He was one of the first elected American political leaders who began to question the existing Cold War philosophy, that if you were anti-communist and on America's side in the Cold War, the United States would not pressure you very much, even if it contradicted fundamental American values about democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. And the South African government played that game very consciously. As we know, they passed a law called Suppression of Communism Act, and they used it against anyone that they said was a communist. But they also used it for anyone who was anti-apartheid. Some of the most prominent anti-apartheid liberals who were anti-communist were arrested under the Suppression of Communism Act. And that's what the apartheid government said to the Americans for decades. You might not like our policies, but we'll protect the sea route around the Cape. We will prevent Soviet incursion into Southern Africa. And if you need, we will help you gather intelligence. And the apartheid government also liked to say, and hey, don't lecture us. Look at your own racial problems. Robert Kennedy said that it was not good enough just to be anti-communist and take America's side in the Cold War. America must also stand up for something positive about American values and human rights and democracy and the rule of law. He was one of the first major politicians to begin to think like that. And it affected his thinking about South Africa, about post-colonial Africa in general, and the war in Vietnam. Chief Luthuli was the first important African leader that Robert Kennedy met. He influenced him very deeply, and Robert Kennedy carried those ideas with him into his 1968 presidential campaign. A few months after he came back from South Africa, Robert Kennedy wrote an article in a prominent magazine called Look magazine. The article was called Suppose God is Black. The title came from an answer he gave to a student during his talk at Stellenbosch University. You know, there were those racists who used to find sections of the Bible to justify apartheid. And Robert Kennedy said to him, hey, well, what happens if you go to heaven and God is black? Took the student by surprise. It was an important article because it was the first time that any major American political figure, particularly someone in Congress, had written such an article about what was going on in South Africa, a place that he had visited. Robert Kennedy wrote about Chief Luthuli in the article. For 5 years, until our visit, the 500,000 people of Soweto had no direct word from their leader, the band Albert Luthuli. My wife and I had helicoptered down the Valley of 1,000 Hills at dawn to see him at Groutville, about 44 miles inland from Durban. He is the most impressive man, with a marvelously lined face, strong yet kind. My eyes first went to the white goatee, so familiar in his pictures. But then quickly, the smile took over, illuminating his whole presence. Eyes dancing and sparkling. At mention of apartheid, however, his eyes went hurt and hard. To talk privately, we walked out under the trees and through the fields. What are they doing to my country, to my countrymen, he sighed. Can't they see that men of all races can work together and that the alternative is a terrible disaster for all of us? I gave him a portable record player and some records of excerpts of President Kennedy's speeches. President Kennedy's Civil Rights speech of June 11th, 1963. And we all listened in silence. Chief Luthuli, his daughter, two government agents accompanying us, my wife and I. At the end, Chief Luthuli, deeply moved, shook his head. The government men stared fixedly at the floor. As I left the old chief, I thought of the lines from Shakespeare. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shaw, for that interesting address. And I think you reminded us of a number of things. You reminded us of the similarities and differences between the struggles in the United States and in South Africa. You reminded us of the difference in being a political minority as opposed to a political majority, and what that means for struggle. And importantly, I think you showed us the role of the church in the struggle against injustice, both in the United States and in South Africa, that the role that the churches have played because of the values that they stand for and espouse, and turn that into practical manifestations of struggle. And that linked us with us in the United States, especially the African American community. We've seen that Chief Luthuli was invited by church organizations, and we've seen also from what you've said that the civil rights movement was very similar in many ways to the anti-apartheid movement. Both Martin Luther King and Chief Luthuli saw the fight against racism not as something that was localized, but that had to be confronted across borders and internationally. So wherever injustice existed, because of the very values that we stand for as human beings and in the organizations that we come from, we have to use non-violent methods like civil obedience, which was started by M.K. Gandhi and developed further by Martin Luther King and other leaders to overcome injustice wherever we find it. I think you also reminded us that racism is inextricably linked with economic exploitation. That it's not racism for the sake of racism, but underlying that racism is the need to exploit. And so the political oppression, and we saw that in the history of South Africa, is directly linked to exploitation and the landlessness of the people that we still experience today, that legacy that we are confronting and a challenge that we need to address. I think importantly also, Professor Shaw pointed to the importance of mobilizing world opinion. That if we are to confront injustice anywhere and everywhere, that mobilization, sanctions, boycotts, divestment all serve to confront the horrors of the social injustices that we see on a daily basis. And if we claim to stand for human rights, for democracy, for the rule of law, then clearly the position that we took as South Africans at the International Court of Justice, for example, is simply a continuation of the legacy of Chief Albert Luthuli, of Oliver Tambo, of Nelson Mandela, and our great leaders that have propelled us, despite our size and power, into an international space where we are able to confront injustice, no matter how powerful the opposition may be. And I think those are the values that come from the teachings of Albert Luthuli. So, Professor Shaw, thank you for reminding us of all of those things. And in a few moments, we're going to have a response by Dr. Hadebe. But before that, we're going to now have a musical rendition. So this will be a welcome break by the Groutville High School Choir. Okay. Okay, let's have another round of applause. Wasn't that beautiful? There's something soothing and healing and purifying and joyous about the choir music and gospel choir in particular. And I want to say on behalf of everyone here, thank you very much indeed to Luthuli High Choir for entertaining us. And now Dr. Hadebe has a difficult task of speaking after that kind of entertainment. But I'm sure she's up to it. So our discussant today is Dr. Noluthando Hadebe. She is a postdoctoral fellow of the Albert Luthuli Research Chair. She obtained her PhD from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in 2020 and holds a master's in international relations, also obtained at UKZN. She has worked within the academic space and also in local government, where she served on numerous intergovernmental and provincial committees. Noluthando's research interests are in conflict and peace studies, social cohesion, China-South Africa relations, women, and also on issues of governance in local government. So I'd like to invite now Dr. Hadebe to respond to Professor Shaw's presentation. Noluthando Hadebe.
Thank you, Prof. Umndeni wakaLuthuli, ubuholi bonke bemuseum, umphakathi waseGraubville wonke namaphethelo, ubabukhansela namaqabane wonke athambo, ngiyanibona amaqabane. Usolwazi bonke abakhona, uHambeli esuka eMelika, usolwazi uShaw, usolwazi Uchesi, okuyena osiphathela uhlelo, umphathi wami uSolwazi Sikhalo, the American Consulate, amalungu ebhodi elisimemile, uMnumzane Vula, siyabingelela, kuyintokozo kakhulu ukuba phakathi kwenu. So mine here, colleagues, is just to reflect on Professor Shaw's speech and his thoughts. So Chief Albert Luthuli is a prominent leader in the global fight against apartheid and also the civil rights movement in the USA and also in South Africa. He is celebrated internationally for bringing international attention to the struggles of Black South Africans under the apartheid rule. During his visit to the USA, Luthuli met with key political figures and civil rights leaders, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We can say safely that his visit helped to solidify the connections that also draw parallels between the struggles of Americans and also the struggles of Black South Africans under the apartheid rule. My apologies. Through his advocacy and his accommodative nature, we can say that he became a symbol of global resistance against racial injustice all over the world. We can also safely say that his influence extended beyond just South Africa. He helped to shape a united front against oppression worldwide. His presence highlighted the interconnectedness of struggles for freedom and equality across different continents. This assisted to build broader coalitions, including increased support from the US civil society, churches, and students for the anti-apartheid cause. My focus here today is to present the dichotomy of two Americas. That is what my focus is on. So Professor Shaw did a stellar job to actually speak to the role of the USA in the fight against apartheid in South Africa. But mine is to say that the United States' relationship with South Africa during apartheid is very complex. It is being marked by opposition, also complacency, and also support for the apartheid regime in South Africa. Whilst the prominent view is the one that points to a USA that supported the apartheid government, there also exists a less talked about America that played a key role in the fight against the apartheid regime in South Africa. Let me just speak to some of the complacency on the part of the US and its pro-apartheid stance. And these included the reality that we cannot deny that at some point and in various cases, the USA has supported the apartheid government in South Africa. This is despite the awareness of the US, it still maintained significant trade relations with South Africa. So this was done through American companies that continue to invest in South Africa and its economy. These were areas such as mining, manufacture, and finance. And it was these investments that ensured that it was able to support the apartheid government economically. Siphinde futhi sisho ukuthi-ke iMelika iphinde yaqhubeka yahweba naleli lethu lendabade ikakhulukazi kusaphethe laba abamhlophe. Kuphinde kwaba nama-loans such as loans from the American banks such as Chase Manhattan and also Citibank that provided loans to the South African government under apartheid. There were also political and diplomatic support initiatives by the USA. So I think Prof. Shaw did speak about this, that during the Cold War, the United States of America viewed South African government as an ally against communism in Africa. As such, the US was reluctant to enforce pressure on the South African government. The US also prioritized its anti-communist agenda over confronting apartheid in South Africa. It also utilized its veto power against to vote in the UN Security Council to block or weaken resolutions that aimed at sanctioning South Africa or taking a stronger action against the apartheid regime. Kuningi okunye ebengingakubalula, kodwa ngenxa yesikhathi ngicela ukuthi ngiphinde ngidlule. They also continue to have cultural and educational exchanges between them and South Africa. Siphinde sikuveze ukuthi-ke iMelika iphinde-ke yashintsha indlela yayo yokucabanga around the 1980s, la ibisishintsha khona isiseka sikulwiswane nobandlululo. My focus now, colleagues, is on the less spoken about and the more positive side of the USA and its anti-apartheid stance. So this is an often less told side of the USA and how it played a key role in the fight against apartheid in our country. The United States of America played a significant role in opposing apartheid through various means. This was grassroots activism, economic sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and also cultural investment. Solwazi Shaw ukhulumile nge-de-investment movement la kwakunqenqwa khona ukuthi-ke laba abahwebayo bayeke ukuthi bahwebe neNingizimu Afrika ukuze bakwazi ukuthi bakhulule bonke ababecindezelekile. This movement was highly effective in raising awareness and also putting economic pressure on the apartheid regime. They also ensured that there was isolation and boycotts against the apartheid government in South Africa. Here, we saw musicians and artists who refused to perform or also compete in South Africa. There was a lot of also student activism and also public pressure from the United States of America. And we see this in the beginning of the 1960s after Luthuli had visited the country. And we saw the fight against apartheid gaining momentum around the 1970s and 80s with a strong anti-apartheid movement emerging in the United States of America. And we can see various movements, organized protests, boycotts, and also the de-investment campaigns aimed at pressuring the United States institutions to actually sever ties with South Africa. There was a lot of diplomatic pressure as well through isolation and condemnation. Here, we saw a global anti-apartheid movement growing. The United States government began to exert more pressure on the South African apartheid government. We also saw the United States of America supporting the United Nations resolution that condemned apartheid and also encouraged other countries to join in isolating South Africa. Professor Shaw also spoke about the media coverage, where we saw American media ensuring that they covered the brutality of the apartheid regime in the country. And this included the Sharpeville massacre, the Soweto uprising, and so forth. And this, ladies and gentlemen, played a critical role in shaping the public opinion in the US and around the world. This coverage was very helpful in building support for the anti-apartheid policies and actions. As I end, I would like to say, as Luthuli said, Africa is my continent and I must free Africa. Siyabonga.
Thank you, Dr. Adebe, for giving us that overview that detailed the complex nature of the relationship between South Africa and the United States. That the US can't be looked at as a homogeneous entity. There were elements, structures, organizations within the US that openly supported apartheid, and there were those who struggled against it and expressed their solidarity with us throughout the years. And I think that can be seen for other countries as well. In Western Europe, the United Kingdom, it was the same sort of thing. And whilst even our allies in the former USSR were openly supportive, many of the people and organizations within those countries were not as accepting of us as Africans as we know. So they are nuanced and complex relationships. And we saw it even now in Ukraine when the war began and the way in which foreigners were actually treated. So it's I think a good time for us to reflect on international relations to reflect on international relations through the lens of the values, the ideas, the theories, the philosophies, and the beliefs of our great leaders like Albert Luthuli and others that I've mentioned earlier. So it's your turn now, friends. I saw some of you nodding vigorously in approval of some of the things that were being said, and looking stony-faced at other things that were being said. So we open it up directly for discussion. I don't know whether Prof. Shaw wants to say anything in response to Dr. Adebe before we start, or yeah. Okay, so there's going to be roving mics that will pass around, and you are welcome. Mr. Luthuli, you would like to contribute?
No. I just want to post. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. There's a mic coming up. Prof. Shaw, you have reflected on luminary figures, the Kennedys, the Martin Luthers of this world, as well as our patron here. But how do you think that all three of them would, if they were to come back today and observe what is happening in the Middle East, where a whole nation is systematically being decimated, how do you think that they would reflect on it?
It's a tough question. For me to speak, first of all, for how people like that would see it. I think they would try and achieve peace. And I think they would acknowledge the terrible crisis between Israel and Palestine. And they would certainly make note of the characteristics, particularly in the West Bank, which are very much like apartheid. And the similarities will be very, very clear. I make no claim to being an expert on the Middle East, and I don't want to make claims. I think that they would very strongly condemn what's happening in Gaza. I think they would be concerned about the murder of Israelis, and they would seek peace. And in my view, the only way forward would be a compromise which would allow for both peoples to have their land, and a two-state solution. Because I think the alternative is endless fighting and suffering, terrible suffering for both sides. So I think that they would very much support, as I believe the United Nations has and most people have, a two-state solution which would provide legitimate, credible nationhood and a sense of belonging and identification for both Israelis and for Palestinians. And they would be very, very critical of the occupation of the West Bank. And I think they would be very, very critical of what's happened in Gaza.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we take any other questions from the floor, I want to give Dr. Hadeba a chance to ask her questions of Professor Shaw.
Thank you once again, Prof. So my question is, the first one is, so it can be argued that the USA's support for the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa was influenced by the US's own issues with the civil rights movement. So today, do you think that both countries are still continuing in that light of thinking? And I also cite the Palestine issue. So in South Africa, our stance has been clear. But also in the case of the US, what do you think the stance is there? Is the US still maintaining despite maybe you can speak to the Russia-Ukraine issue.
Thank you. Let me first say, the first part of your question, absolutely, the anti-apartheid movement in the United States was the biggest mobilization since the Civil Rights Movement. And it was led very much by African Americans, by the Black Caucus, by Randall Robinson and Jesse Jackson. And it was very, very important because it's the one area where the Black Caucus and the African Americans really led American foreign policy and had a significant. As far as the U.S. itself is domestically concerned, it's an ongoing struggle to make a more perfect union. The struggle against racism continues. We have made great progress, but we still have terrible problems. We did have the presidency of Barack Obama, and we hope when I have the presidency of Kamala Harris, the elected first Black woman president of the United States. But like everywhere, you sort of go forwards and you sort of go backwards. On the American stance in the Middle East, once again, I don't feel particularly expert. I'm just an observer. But I do think that America is struggling how to help bring peace to both peoples. And I do think that there's going to be more pressure on Israel with the new Congress to force them to change their policies in the West Bank and to force them to accept a Palestinian state. So I think that's sort of coming up. I think that's sort of changing. But we'll have to see sort of in the future how that sort of plays out. But you can see it in the Democratic Party. It's very divided, and they have their convention as we're speaking. It's shifting its position in terms of what to do in the Middle East, and certainly how to try and help the region achieve a two-state solution. Because, from the river to the sea, for the Israelis is no good, and from the river to the sea for the Palestinians is no good. We have to have a compromise where both people who have a claim to the land can share that and come to some kind of compromise and thrive together. So I think it's going to be a big issue the next few years in the United States. But I make no claims to having any expertise beyond just a concerned citizen.
Okay, so thank you, Prof. Shaw. So my second question is around, and everyone here would know, Africa is flooded with American entertainment movies, and yourself being a filmmaker or documentary movie. Do you think that the country has been responsible in utilizing its power of film, power of television, to actually, in the fight for equality and freedoms and so on?
In American culture around the world? Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. Some American music has been deeply political and, certainly coming out of America, the civil rights movement and soul music and has had an impact. But like any other culture as well, much of it is just commercial. But I think we should also appreciate the impact that African music and African musicians has had on the United States. It's a two-way street, and more I think that Americans are appreciating African music and theater. And I think 20, 30 years ago, it was much more of a one-way street, where American culture was coming into the rest of the world, but nothing coming back. But I think the new ways of distributing media, like streaming, has made that possible. Americans are watching movies and television from many, many other countries, whereas before I think they were very kind of closed-minded about it.
I think we can take the mics to the floor now. Professor Shaw may even get a diplomatic posting after this. So diplomatic responses to difficult questions.
Greetings, Professor Shaw and the House at large. I would like to ask some questions based on your presentation. The first one, because it's currently happening now, you did talk about Dr. King's argument about the depiction of Africa by the West and others, saying the land of the savages, barbarics, and all. So I want us to look at how are we going to deal with racism while we still see color in humanity, while we still see black and white. And then the other question is currently happening in DRC. I want to understand, I believe WHO, which is the World Health Organization, originates in America. So now the mpox is currently happening in DRC, which is a country in Africa, placed with natural resources and everything. So now it has to beg for vaccines from World Health Organization. So why are we suppressing our homegrown solution? Thank you so much.
Well, what's the last part of what you said, sorry?
The last part.
Yeah.
I was looking at the issue of mpox, which is currently happening. And the World Health Organization is the one that is bringing the vaccines and all. Where the case of COVID, we had homegrown solutions, but they were also suppressed. Why do we have to take everything from World Health Organization or from America? Thank you.
You know, let me be honest again. I claim no expertise in the area of healthcare. I read about it. I probably know more about it than you. And I do think it was important when they gave South Africa the ability to make their own vaccinations and to become independent. The World Health Organization, as you know, is not an American organization. It's a world organization. So I hope that they learned something from COVID, and I hope that the mistakes we made will not be repeated. And when it comes to mpox, they will make the vaccinations available much easier and much quicker. And I believe that South Africa has the scientific expertise to make them locally, and I hope that that will sort of go forwards. What's the first part of your question? I think I missed that.
I looked at the issue of racism, and I said the day we gave color to humanity was the day racism came into existence. So how are we going to deal with racism while we still see color in humanity, while we still see black, and while we still see white?
You know, I think the solution is to respect each other, a rainbow nation. America's at its best when, you know, people can be who they want to be and they can explore and celebrate their ethnicity and their traditions and their cultures, but they can all unify under the umbrella of being members of the same country. And I see the same thing in South Africa, you know, and the same way America's great strength is its diversity. I was looking at the American Olympic team. Well, look at the Springbok rugby team, right? It's a diverse team, and the strength is not to change, but to respect other people. They're different to you, but they have equal rights and equal opportunities. It doesn't mean that you cannot be who you want to be, because you all agree in the basic fundamentals of a democracy and the rights of equality to be who you want to be and to explore who you want to be. That doesn't mean that you have to give up your race or your religion or ethnicity just to respect someone else being different. That's, you know. So I think we can respect our differences and enjoy each other, our diversity, and celebrate that. And I think America is at its best is when it celebrates its diversity and it doesn't try and give special attention or privileges to one sector.
Power to the people. Power. When I'm saying power, and then we say to the people. Power. Power. To the people. To the people. Oh, by the way, my name is Brian Tutugo Debele, a regional fundraiser of Umkhonto Wesizwe Youth League Ilembe. I would like to greet our professor and also our people. Why I'm saying our people? Because in KwaZulu-Natal, as Mkondo Wesizwe, we are having a large vote, which means all of you here, you are our people. My first question is, what was the role that played by the congregation in South Africa during the apartheid era in terms of making sure that the black people know the useful of land? Sorry. And then the second question, are we black people benefited in democracy? Why I'm asking this question is because in South Africa, we spoke about the democracy, but a democracy is just a terminology without practical. We can't have a land. We can't spoke about the democracy while we don't have a land, while the foreigners are having hectares in our country. And the third question is that are we as I'm very glad that, to hear that Chief Advocate Luthuli was able to go in America to meet with other black leaders in making sure that they are liberating black people in terms of emancipation. But right now, our black leaders are they still have the consciousness of black people? My question is that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I understood your question, well, there are many more experts than me to speak about the church, the black church in South Africa. I know I can only just admire what Chief Luthuli did through the work of the church, and of course, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was a very, very important leader here in South Africa, and I think second to Mandela, the most important leader, certainly in terms of the outside world. When Archbishop Tutu came to America, his word was very, very important when America was debating what to do about South Africa. And Archbishop Tutu came and he spoke very clearly, and he met with President Reagan, and he told President Reagan that I think your policies are immoral and unchristian. People heard that. And I think what Bishop Tutu did, he really helped to influence the pressure in America and in Congress to put pressure through sanctions and divestment against South Africa. So there are many more experts than I, and I want to say again, I don't want to speak about topics I'm not expert in and others are more expert than I. Obviously, there are other aspects of the church in South Africa, but certainly in terms of the anti-apartheid movement, Archbishop Tutu was very, very important, as well as, of course, the Reverend Alan Bussa, who also played a very important role coming to America and speaking out with Bishop Tutu and putting pressure in South Africa through the church. The second part of your question, I have my views, but I feel once again there are many in this room who I'm a little reluctant to get into domestic politics sort of too much. What can I say? You know, democracy is an ongoing challenge to try and improve. I think South Africa has come through very difficult challenges, but its democracy is strong and has survived and will continue to. And I think it's very impressive what South Africa has been able to achieve and through elections, because there's lots of problems and lots of conflict, but a democracy requires trying to resolve them peacefully through elections. And I think that is very important. I know that the land issue is unresolved, but I think I'll have to leave it to President Ramaphosa and Mr. Malema to resolve it. And Mr. Zuma, of course, as well. It's beyond my pay grade. I'll have to leave it to them. But I know it's an unresolved issue, to be sure.
Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. Mine is not a question, but it's a comment. I would like to make a comment about the values and the belief of Chief Albert Luthuli. He strongly believed in sports and education. Recently, we had Olympics in Paris, if I'm not mistaken. And if we look in our society, do you have any representative coming from Gauteng, coming from KZN? I think that is where our values are. We should look back and say, he has made a contribution into our society. So where are we with what he believes in? Coming to the education sector, we have a number of students who are dropping out from the education system, being given all the resources. As a Black child, where are you going to? And we'd also like to see or to have in our curriculum history as a compulsory subject so that our students will know their background, where they're coming from, so that they will have a vision where they're going to. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Ndanda Sibiya. I'm a chairperson of the ANC in this branch. We are operating around this ward. I'm very grateful to share the same oxygen with you, Professor Lericho, and now Professor Shetty, and now Names Usembogoto, Upamwet, Mahateb. I'm very grateful indeed. But, and I'm also happy that you also touch, because in these days, we have a problem where we have people who are trying to distort history. You also touched that Luthuli was also the member of the ANC. Because without mentioning that, it will be a disaster, because you cannot dismantle Luthuli from the ANC, because he is a revolutionary, he is a peace somebody, and all what he have attained, he attained it through the political means, where he was under the ANC banner. But I need a little bit of the advice, because we might be going to the conferences where we need to shape the policies. I'm not specifically to you, Professor Shu, but I would also like to get a comment from Professor Shetty as well, and also Usis Nultano. As we have said, that the South Africa is still, as you know, the colonizers were within us. We were sharing the same space. But the problem that we are facing now, we have attained the breakthrough 1994, but the problem that we are facing is the land issue and the economic issue, because it's still those parts, they are still within those who were in power in that time of an apartheid. But what can you ask? I need some equipment that we can use to fast track what I've mentioned, the land and the economic issue. And also, let me see, I've write something down here. Yeah, and also, as we have mentioned, Professor Lerisho, that on those days, the global people were gathered together to help the South Africa. Now, how are we going to translate, or how are we going to translate that into the youth of today? Because growing up into a distorted society. Thank you.
Just a few thoughts, and I'll pass it on to my colleagues as well. I think that, the question you raise is the question of history. How do we teach about history? And I think it's important. And I have been surprised looking at some of the books, the history books, how little is taught about Chief Luthuli and the apartheid era, and how much young people don't seem to know about these remarkable leaders and how courageous they were. And I'm sort of surprised. So I hope that those who are writing history books will tell more of this history. The other thing is, I think South Africa is an important country, and South Africa both has relations with the West. South Africa has relations with Russia and with China. So South Africa is a very important position as a leader of Africa. Maybe sometimes South Africa will get a united seat in the Security Council. So I think South Africa has a very important role to play in the region and in global politics. And South Africa can truly be sort of non-aligned and have good relations with the West, benefit from economic relations with the West, and also benefit from relationships with BRICS. So South Africa should be able to get the benefits from both sectors of the world as it's currently divided at the global level. Let me pass to my colleague too.
Thank you, Prof. So maybe just as a start is that indeed I also agree. On paper, we are said to be democratic. However, in practice, and we spoke about this yesterday, our economy still remains largely in the hands of a few, also in terms of land as well. But I think we are a remarkable democracy. During the elections, ngibona ukuthi hey kuzobheduka kodwa ke our democracy is resilient, and we are here, we are in one piece under the GNU. Uyagwaza lo mkhonto ngapha, yale. But the point is that I think it goes back to the principles of Inkosi uLuthuli, that when we are in power, that we lead by example. Khona nje isihlava esikhona sokuthi wonke umuntu ongenayo unalento yobusela nokufuna ukuqoqa ukuthi nje ngiqoqela ukuthi mhla ngiphuma ngibe ngisafe. So ngicabanga ukuthi ke kuqala nomuntu ukuthi ubusela nje kuphele kusukela ewadini kunyuka kuya phezulu. Ama-food hemp, izinto ey'ncane nje lezi ey'ncane. Ngicabanga ukuthi that is the only advice ngempela ukuthi sonke siyiyeke le nto yokutshontsha. Siyabonga.
Thank you. Yeah, you can go ahead. I'll make a few concluding remarks at the end.
Thank you, Sir. My name is Dabentle Mthokozi Simzoneli, the convener of the ANC Youth League in this district. But I reside in this particular ward and I'm a member of the ANC good standing. I want to greet all professors in the room, including Professor Dabala, Professor JT Mahatebe, Professor Shaw. My one is a comment. I'm a person who strongly believes in solutions. If you look at the life of Inkosi Ubaba Luthuli, he was a remarkable leader. He was more practical than theoretical. Because sometimes it's good to be to say certain things, but your actions must go hand in hand with what you are saying. And I want to touch on two issues. One, the issue of the economy. I'm going to simplify a few things. Any nation that fails to produce its own soap, toothpaste, all the stuff you see in your room when you wake up, that nation has a formula
for disaster. Let's explain why. Because the moment we are not in the economy of our country, we can't create jobs. Our economy will continue to be in the position it's in. Now, what we need to do as a country, as a nation, is to be practical. We need to start making our own clothes. If you look at the US or China or Russia, whatever country, any superpower country, they are in charge of the economy. We are a country that is consuming a lot of things from other countries. And we really need to start to have a debate of, like how President Thabo Mbeki had a concept of proudly South African. We need to go back, but there's a smallanyana racial element that we have. We have a tendency of thinking that if a product is done by a David, it's not a South African. When a product is done by a Swiss or somewhere, we don't want to support it. Based on our past, we need mentally we need to get past that and start working together, because the enemy is not the next white person or the Indian person. The enemy is the system that is oppressing our country, becoming a country that is begging other countries than being a global superpower. I think that's where we should copy from people like Babu Albert Luthuli, that even you can come from a small town, like a small place like Granville, you can have an impact in the world. And those are the things we should copy. And the land issue, we need to be clear about the land issue and not be wishy-washy about it. We need people who understand what are you going to do with the land and be practical about the land. I see no problem when a white South African owns land. I see no problem when a black South African owns land, because the Freedom Charter is clear about this thing. The land belongs to those who work it. Because when you have a huge amount of land and it's not being utilized, that's where it starts. It doesn't make sense when there are young people who are academics, young people who are entrepreneurs, who want to utilize that in the best interest of South Africa. Now, I won't speak for other political parties, because the way that they think is it's as if you want land. Yes, we know land belongs to the indigenous people of the country and so forth, but we are South Africa. We have an identity. Our identity is tolerance, racial tolerance. Everybody, black or white, we are still fighting similar fights that Luthuli were fighting for. You could look at it in terms of opportunities, and our government needs to start thinking outside the box and having dialogues about such things and bringing solutions to everybody. Because when you are leading everybody, black, white, EFF, you need everybody when you are a leader. And you need example like Mahatma just raised. We must root out corruption. It doesn't matter that you're outside the state. We must follow you and deal with your corrupt elements. If you have to go to jail, because whatever little you are stealing from the people. You are depriving a nation from going forward. Nyabo.
Awesome.
Greetings, sanibonani. Igama lami ngiwumpume ngokwamadonsela. Ngicabanga ukuthi anginawo umbuzo. I don't think this is a question, but this is what I would like us to kind of like reflect on, if we are to look into the life of Baba Chief Albert Luthuli. We have somehow a tendency of seeing ourselves as victims. We may not be doing it all the time, and we may not be doing it consciously, but I think we are doing it. And if we are to see the leaders, our forefathers, as great as they are, they have paved the foundation, paved the way. I do not understand why we still have to look into the situations and see ourselves as victims. We need to be fixing these things, period. And so today, as we are having this lecture, Here is the man who has been not just from Proudville. He was a global citizen. There is nothing that is stopping our kids, us, going anywhere in the world if we want to. We need to instill education. We need to go back to the roots of who we are and stop complaining. Stop seeing ourselves as victims, because right now, if I have to be honest, I don't think that we should still be saying apartheid this. Part of the audience here, they don't even know what that is. They don't. So why are we complaining? Why are they complaining? It is the stuff that we shouldn't be doing. Let us do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabani Mazibugo. One question: do you support our BRICS strategy and its resolutions like de-dollarization and other plans? Two, you are going to elections soon. Who do you think can assist us? Because I can see candidates are not clear about international collaborations and cooperations. I'm part of the UX Exchange alumni. I want to check who can assist us, because you remember people from the US, I cannot call names, were blaming us by taking the stand against Russia, Ukraine. Our neutral point is not accepted. Secondly, the Israel Palestine, they did not want us to take Israel on to the court. So what can be your take on that? Who can we put our shoulders on with the hope that they are going to entertain our strategies as South Africa? Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's a few thoughts. I think South Africa should have relations with the BRICS countries and with the West. I think it would be a big mistake for South Africa only to go with the BRICS countries and not to go with the West. They are strong enough and experienced enough to be independent and to have good relations with the West and to have good relations with the BRICS countries. South Africa is uniquely positioned kind of to be able to do that. Secondly, we can have differences. We don't have to agree. Either on Ukraine, Russia, or on Israel, Palestine. The United States and South Africa are independent countries. They can have different views. They discuss them. And then we go to the United Nations and we kind of vote. As far as the future is concerned, I must be quite transparent, and I'm hoping very, very much for Kamala Harris to win. And I happen to be cautiously hopeful that she win. And I don't think that Mr. Trump would be very good for Africa. I can remind you what he spoke about South Africa, what he said about how he referred to them. I won't repeat it. I think he'd be a disaster for Africa as well as for the United States. I think Kamala Harris would be terrific president. I'm hoping she wins. And it's obviously early. Even when she's president, she'll have a time to develop a policy towards Africa and towards South Africa. And I'm sure she will draw upon talented, expert people, and she's very friendly with Barack Obama. I'm sure she'll get good advice. So I'm hopeful that the future will be better. In my view, and I'm obviously not neutral, it'll be a lot better than if Mr. Trump comes back again, both for South Africa as well as for America. In fact, if Mr. Trump comes back again, I'm kind of maybe moving back.
Thank you, Prof. So I don't have any views on American politics. However, I think that as a sovereign state, South Africa, we are sovereign. And I think that we should be allowed, without being bullied in any way, to take any stance by the US or anyone else. So I think our stance on being non-aligned is intact and remains, and I think it's quite fair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This is D. Kumedo from Watuguza, and expressing the words of gratitude for the lecture just delivered a few minutes ago, Prof. The question that I have, it's the term that has been used, which I just don't understand, but today I'm lucky because who's coming from America. The term nigger, its meaning, and whether it's now accepted by the African Americans or not.
It's a very derogatory term, and no one uses it. I mean, maybe some people in songs do, but no, it's a very derogatory term, and anyone who uses it is rightfully significantly criticized. I don't know anyone who I read about using that terrible term. It's similar to the terrible terms, racist terms you had in South Africa. People don't use those anymore, and hopefully these terms have, flushed down the tubes of history. So no, it's a terrible term, and it reflects a terrible time in American history. Same as these terrible terms in South Africa reflect a time of disrespect and of real racism. Did that sort of answer the question you asked? Thank
you. Okay, we can take one more question before we round up. Is there anyone else who didn't have a chance to speak? Covered. Okay, great stuff. Okay, so Professor Shaw, I think from the questions, you can see that South Africans and ordinary South Africans have a very heightened political consciousness and have a very serious and ingrained approach to questions of injustice. And because of our history and our past and our struggles and our sufferings, I think South Africans are acutely aware of the sufferings of oppressed people in other parts of the world. And from the questions that came up talking about injustices, social injustice, economic injustice, and other things, that became very clear to me in the way in which those questions were asked. A number of questions related to the present and the future in South Africa. Those are deep questions, I think, that all of us are grappling with, are trying to understand. And I'd say that many people have questioned, after 1994, the move from the Reconstruction and Development Program to GEAR as our macroeconomic strategy. And as soon as that occurred, after 2 years of the Mandela government, headed by President Thabo Mbeki thereafter, we saw the consequences of heightened unemployment, of heightened inequality, and a whole range of social ills that accompany economic programs that are aligned with those of GEAR. So GEAR essentially was saying that we should leave development in society to the private sector, that the state should not play an interventionist role in society, but should have a very small role. It should be the private sector and private individuals who run the country, that growth should be export driven, and that we should prepare for export markets as opposed to internal markets. All the protectionism that South African industries, factories had was removed, and then we were unable to compete with the Chinese factories, with the Indian factories, and with imports, cheap imports. And so that destroyed local industries. For example, the clothing industry in the Durban area was completely gutted as a result of the removal of protectionism and as a result of the new policies that were implemented. There were corporate tax cuts And there was also a move away from social services towards privatization. And I think those were part of a bundle of policies that affected our trajectory in the last 28 years. And so whilst it is true to say that we shouldn't cry over apartheid because it was a long time ago, we are living the legacy of that apartheid. We still live in segregated areas. We go to certain types of schools as a result of that 30-year history. And essentially, we've been unable to transform society in 1994. And the results of the last election are proof of that and recognition of that by the electorate, that something went to put it right. So that recognition, and then coupled with corruption, with cronyism, with a lack of accountability by people who have been corrupt and so on, we have found ourselves in the morass that we are in. And all of these things need to be addressed. And I think we're turning the corner. I think that the proliferation of political parties has introduced more accountability because when people are in power and have no resistance to that power or little challenge to that power, then that absolute power corrupts, as you know. So your questions around land and economic issues are very fair ones. And your questions around whether democracy has benefited South Africans is also a very fair one. Because whilst China is regarded by the United States and the Western powers as an undemocratic society, they've been able to pull 500 million Chinese out of poverty in the last 25 years and to become one of the largest economies in the world, set to overtake the United States in the foreseeable future. So you have a society that is undemocratic in the sense of the right to vote and the liberties that some of us take for granted, but that have been able to transform the economy in a manner that serves the poorest and the underprivileged of those societies. But what happens in China if you're corrupt? They take you outside and shoot you. There's no question, you're executed. That would be a human rights violation. So the question is, how do we balance our quest for human rights, for law and order, with the need for economic development in a society as historically unequal as ours, and that needs urgent redress? So those are some of the complicated questions that we need to address. The question on the role of the church was a good one also. What role did the church play? In any society, the church, like other institutions of society, support the status quo. That is the way the ideology of capitalist economies work. To oppose the status quo means being a liberation theologian or being a theologian of the stature of Archbishop Tutu and others who had the moral courage and the political awareness and consciousness to challenge the regime, including Nkosi Albert Luthuli. So it's a question of who breaks through the ideological hegemony of the power elite at any given point in time and can challenge that. And you will always see those churches that are conservative and those that are radical, individuals that are both conservative and radical from different churches. So you can't look at the church as one homogeneous entity that either supported apartheid or was against apartheid. And even now, the proliferation of churches and the manner in which it is being abused is of serious concern, which also needs serious address without damaging the democratic right of people to worship in whatever way they want, unless, of course, they offend your sensibilities and violate your rights in the process. So all of these questions would have to be answered. I think we have a lot in common with African Americans. We love the music. All of you know that. We love the music. We love the sports heroes, except when it comes to the 4x100 meters. That's where we break our ties with our American brothers and sisters. So I'm saying on a lighter note that what happens in the world is that the hegemonic power, which presently is the United States, also has soft power. That soft power is seen in the way in which my students are spelling like Americans. We are supposed to be the products of British colonialism. Why are we spelling like the Americans now? So you will find that the hegemonic power dominates. It would be in the movies, in the culture, in the way we dress, in the way we speak, and so on. But the greatest have fallen, the mightiest have fallen. And all of these, if you have a longer sense of history, you will see different civilizations emerge over periods of time and new powers emerge. And that contestation is happening now. And a small part of that contestation is BRICS. BRICS is playing an important role in asserting the rights of smaller countries in the face of supreme power, backed by military power. And the bottom line is military power. We are still uncivilized as a species to the point where might is right. And that is why that contestation at the ICJ, at the ICC, is so important, because these small incremental changes lead to a more progressive society and international arena in which there can be equality, fraternity, brotherhood, and liberty for all. So in saying those things, I want to say thank you very much indeed to Professor Shaw, because you've stimulated a good debate. You've raised a number of pertinent questions for us as South Africans to look at. Thank you, Dr. Hadebe, for responding to Professor Shaw and also pointing us in certain directions for debate and discussion. Thank you to the Luthuli Museum Board and Council for giving us this opportunity and for commemorating 20 years of its existence. It is very relevant. It is pertinent to the questions that we have to answer. And I want to say that we need to continue it in this vein and discuss and debate. Because we agree doesn't mean that we must fight and kill each other, because our objectives are the same. Our objectives from the beginning was a better life for all. So let us look at that objective, at that horizon, rather than the short-term gains we may get from political parties and so on. And I think we're going to see the benefits as a nation. In saying that, I want to thank every one of you as well for coming here today and for participating. And to close, the poet Tandiwe Funwayo. Is the poet here? Okay. So let's welcome Tandiwe Funwayo to render us a poem, and thereafter Mrs. Veli Luthuli will deliver the official vote of thanks.
One, two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I speak life in that let us rise. Where it is dark, here comes the light. With my voice I shout, painted with white, representing peace. My introduction cannot bear captivation, but commemoration as I lead as a nation, building a rainbow kingdom, building a bridge that has fallen, forming identity, recognizing and respecting diverse ethnics and racial, stimulating competition, supporting innovation, promoting growth of the economy, promoting prosperity while protecting the creations of nations. Even if this introduction cannot bear captivation, but if reparation is a good restoration to a good condition, that means I'll not give a clear classification about my complication and my oppression. One said today it's the celebration of liberation. Our regulation does not draw in the specification of the word celebration. I believe it's the commemoration of our liberation, the liberation that was given to us because our provision. Sanbona, Njani, ngiyaphila nami. Isihloko senkondlo engizoyihaya sithi madoda angabe iqiniso yini leli endenzayo. Kuthulani, cela stand usiqondise. Bye. Oyizoxoxa leyo mama ukuthi uma usekhulile wena ufuna ukuba yini? Mina ma, usengikhulile ufuna ukuba ummeli noma ngibe iphoyisa ngivikele abantu nomphakathi. Ngiqalela ingoma phansi. Bye. Oyizoxoxa leyo mama ukuthi uma usekhulile wena ufuna ukuba yini? Mina ma, masengikhulile ngifuna ukuba iphoyisa noma ngibe ummeli ngivikele abantu nomphakathi. Mase bekhula bayakhohlwa izifungo, amaphupho, izethembiso, impumelelo abayikweleta impilo nginobufakazi. Bengamahlule, bebahle, bemsulwa, bekhula nezifiso nginobufakazi. Ngifungo wesilisa ebumncaneni bakhe owanesifiso sokumela umthetho namuhla unyuka bezinzala abantu. Kangimhlulela ikepha ngesolo kamoya. Ngibona izinsuku zakhe zibaliwe ezweni madoda ngabe iqiniso yini leli enlenzayo. Kulili izizukulwana se-Afrika kwanyakaza amahlule ezibelethweni. Akhala ngengaphakathi lonina athi libafazi beduma inyama isigemegeme zakwemhlaba. Amahlule athi aqala ukuhlala ezibelethweni awakakulungela ukuphuma bheka umhlaba nezinhlungu zakhona. Emva kokufica izalukazi zithukuthele siyiganunwabo bezibabaza umshophi wempilo esiyiphilayo. Sithi izalukazi zaziphila zona thina ngabe impilo yini lena esiyiphilayo. Sithi sikhumbule emandulo lapho amadoda ayesimila esibambe ngesandla sobili awonamhlanje wasavikela yazingela. Sithi sikhumbule emandulo ubuhle bendoda kuyizinkomo zayo, ubuhle bentombi kuyisimilo sayo, umlomo bokuyishaba lokuziphungela. Pho kungani isililo senza labantu singezwakalanga? Kungani izinyembezi zabo zingasulwanga? Ligcwele kanjani igazi labantu abanithwalayo abanizalayo? Siwele kanjani izinyembezi zabo emhlabathini ngenxa yeni madoda? Laba besimame bafice bekuthele bezinonolo bezilile. Bafice endlini yokuthandaza beguqile bekhulekela nina madoda. Nganginifikanga endlini yokuthandaza. Sengivamise ukunifica nenze konakala nibambe inkunzi. Nganifika emajele nasey'nkantolo mani yothatha amacala. Nganifika ezibhotini senidlabhonjwana. Isandla senu beziphakamela laba besimame abanikhulekela mihla namalanga. Nganifika emakhazeni senithule. Siyafunda sisenyathela ngezinyawo zombili nisivela kanjani nisibhalele umlando kamufi inyama isahlangene nomphefumulo athi amagangango siyagqeme ngeqiwantwala ingosini mfana kithi umhlaba lo athi abawuzele ngobuso umbuso wawo abawubonanga hleze ngingangaba namandla okuzilwela namhlanje kodwa ngelinye ilanga isinyembezi zami sike zaqhelela umhlaba kwakhula izihlahla bezigoqelana ngaye lona wesimame wayeyimvelo ithi siswela izandla zokuloba usisi lwakhe ithi bingaphimiswa ngoqa nonkalisa izakhaneziso ukubika ihlazo lomhlaba ifisa umlomo salona wesimame obeloke enkenene zenjalo ehlane mhlazana ephutha umntombi bakhe ngosilisa uhlaza wanquma wakhe kanesimilo sakhe ngosulumo wesilisa abesilisa izono zabo sebazijazele icala labo balikhokele izono zabo bazifele ethi umhlaba siwone kakhulu asilawuleki ethi umhlaba siwone kakhulu uhleze uyaziphindiselela ethi umhlaba usuyagoqa manje Nkosi isikelela sesone kakhulu mdali thethelela kwasukuma wesifazane ethi mhlinzo yakhe ijule kakhulu kwaye usaba nokuzithwala mayingazala uzozala wesilisa isinyembezi zalaba besimame ziyobe zilotshwa ezandleni zakhe okanye azale wesifazane oyaphenduka umhlatshelo walaba besilisa uyafunga ethi swele thina nzala abantu sithwele sithwele icala lokuzala abantu baqede baflatele izibeletho zabo madoda kabe iqiniso yilele lezawuthela ithinge bo.
Thank you, Andiwe Funwayo. I think that's a fitting, powerful note on which to conclude this morning's commemorations and celebrations. But to officially close today and deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the Luthuli family, I'd like to ask Mrs. Veli Luthuli to come up to the platform.
Ngiyabonga ukungizwela bakithi cishe ngawo nanguthulanise zaney'buko zami khona ngingeza ukubheda. On behalf of the Luthuli family, I would like to express our gratitude to the government for having had this thought, excuse me, of preserving the memory of our father and of our mother. I would like us to give our government a round of applause. It's 20 years since this establishment was started as a Luthuli museum, and it has been developed over the years to what you can see today. We feel very honored to have a high caliber of speakers addressing us today. May the partnerships and relationships continue. They help us grow, don't they? Yeah. They do. Thank you. And equality and dignity, which was spoken about earlier. are what Mr. Albert Luthuli fought for and struggled for. Robert Kennedy's visit was a momentous occasion and continues to foster friendships between America and South Africa. Don't you marvel at the non-racial gathering celebrating today? I think we all do, don't we? We all do. And this is what Chief Albert Luthuli and his wife, Nobukanya, should be proud of, because it's what they lived for, it's what they envisaged. Even if they didn't see it with a human eye, they envisaged it, they saw it with a spiritual eye. They had foresight. So I'm very, very proud of it. Professor Shaw, again, thank you for the lecture that has triggered a lot of discussion. Bravery and resolve of Americans is what we have observed over the years as the Luthuli family. After the visit of Mr. Robert Kennedy, because we know that he came even after the South African government refused him permission to come, refused him security to accompany him. He said, I'm going there. I'm going to the Luthuli homestead. So even after that visit, when I was a young Makoti, one morning we saw American people, when we woke up, already walking around in the Luthuli yard. And that was Mr. Andrew Young and Mr. Arthur Ashe, the tennis player. So such visits have continued without me mentioning names, but I'm just marveling at the bravery and the resolve of the American people when they set their mind to what they want to achieve. Chief Luthuli, as has been said, was a man of faith. I think it was that backbone that propelled him to fight on, struggle on, and attempt to achieve his vision. In one of the chapters in the book, Let My People Go, it does say the road to freedom is via the cross. And I think that was very, very profound of him. Faith is a value. Luthuli was a man of faith, a deacon in his church. Talking about anti-apartheid movements, Thandeka, one of Chief Luthuli's daughters, is Thandeka Luthuli Kabashi, who lived in America also, in Atlanta, for a long time. And she was part of this anti-apartheid movement. And I'm sure Professor Shaw, as he said, he's staying in Salt Rock, might want to touch base with Thandeka and reminisce about times gone by. Today, sifundile madoda. Hayi, sifunde namatemu esingawazi, o-dichotomy, nizwile. Guess hambe and look up those terms and develop our own write-ups. Siyabonga Mem Hatebe for tricking our minds. Umem was at Proudly High School. I was in Shailene Zandla. Yeah. We commend her and her group for the choice of song. Ngempela ubaba wake uzamazamisa umhlaba. Akunjalo? Yeah. So kanti futhi sisakhala namanje ngoba Africa is not at a level where we would like it to be. So we do want God to bless Africa. Siyabonga kakhulu mem. Professor Shaw is in the performing arts webakwethu. He's in film and movies. Like Roville, cinema artists, angithi? Yeah, so just take a few minutes and go and talk to him and see how far that can take you. Yeah. Thank you all for the interest and the comments. May we grow in being critical thinkers. God bless Africa and its sons and daughters. Kunjani ngesisukume honorary mem sisho kanjalo nje? God bless Africa and its sons and daughters. Again. God bless Africa and its sons and daughters. Amanda!
Thank you, everyone. I think we invited to refreshments now.